Hello, my name is Reverend Dr. May Elise Cannon. Today is Thursday. It's the 29th of May, 2025. Today is 601 days since the war between Israel and Hamas began, since the decimation of virtually all of the Gaza Strip, since um, 200 and some hostages were taken into Gaza. Yesterday marked 600 days of violence, bloodshed, trauma, bombings, hostages being held, detentions, millions of people living under the threat of war, and Palestinians in Gaza under ethnic cleansing, and what many around the world say can be identified as nothing less than genocide. Today is day 601. This is Thursday, so this is the weekly update, which normally is 25 minutes or so. I try to keep these videos to about 10 minutes a day. We've done one every single day for 601 days. Monday's update was pretty robust because it was a holiday weekend and there have been so many things happening. But I'll try to summarize this, concisely. I was not able to join the live briefing today because I just returned back to the East Coast from Europe. So I got in this afternoon. After being at an event related to Nagorno-Karabakh, Artsakh, and the war between Armenia and Azerbaijan. There's an article we're going to put in the bulletin this week by Crisis Action that summarizes the Armenian crisis that I'd really encourage you to read if you want to understand the history of decades of war since the 1990s and the fall of the Soviet Union. Moving on to Palestine and Israel. In terms of Gaza, at least one Palestinian was killed and 48 others wounded when forces opened fire on a crowd overrunning a new aid distribution site in the Gaza Strip, set up by an Israeli and US-backed foundation. We'll talk more about humanitarian assistance and what's happening there in a minute, but essentially, it all went haywire yesterday, and reports indicated that the private contractors who are ex-soldiers who were manning this aid distribution center lost control, and a militarized helicopter ended up firing. So it was very surprising. I think the death toll might have increased to 3. We'll talk more about that tomorrow. As of Monday, the death tolls in Gaza were at least 53,977 people. The estimates are still that there are more than 10,000 bodies underneath the rubble, and that those numbers are very low. Their total number wounded is 122,966. The Israeli army has killed 3,822 Palestinians and wounded nearly 11,000 people since the end of the ceasefire agreement on March 18th. You'll recall there was a 3-part ceasefire agreement. The first phase ended successfully and 33 hostages were released, and then Israel ended the ceasefire. Over the weekend on Saturday, Gaza's health ministry announced that on Friday, 79 people had been killed. They announced 79 people killed on Saturday. They announced that it had happened on Friday. Sorry, that was confusing. To put a face behind one of the people affected by the bombings, there was the story of the pediatrician, the female doctor whose house was bombed. She and her husband are doctors. This was in the Gaza Strip. The IDF said that the house was in an evacuation zone. The doctor's name was Dr. Ala al-Najjar. She is still alive. Her husband, last I heard, was in intensive care. 9 of her 10 children were killed in their home. She's a pediatrician working at the Nasser Medical Complex at the Al Tahrir Clinic in Gaza. She was on duty. Her husband had dropped her off and then returned home. That's Dr. Hamdi al-Najjar, and he is injured. One of their children, named Adam, is still alive. Also, last Friday, there was an announcement about the chronic shortages of water in Gaza and the way the water crisis is worsening amid Israel's expanding offensive, with a full shutdown of water and sanitation facilities possible by the end of the week. I don't know if that's improved significantly because of the aid that's being allowed in, or what the situation is in that regard. But water is at a devastating position in terms of how difficult it is to obtain. Another one of the main developments was the transition of mechanism for aid. So aid was delivered by the United Nations and private aid agencies. Then aid was cut off for 70 days, I think it was. It was cut off for such an extensive period of time. So no one was distributing aid. And then the mechanism that started back up was the Israeli-US mechanism, which again, I'll talk about. And in the interim, they did allow for the UN to operate some. And this new mechanism has just started distributing humanitarian assistance in Gaza. So we do know, let me just tell you a little bit more about the crisis that happened at the aid distribution center where everything failed. What happened was thousands of Gazans stormed the American Aid Center at Al Alam roundabout. They seized food parcels and tables and dismantled parts of the barbed wire fence. This prompted helicopters to intervene to protect Americans, and the situation spiraled out of control. Today, it was announced that the U.S.-backed aid group halted its distribution. That was on Wednesday morning, after the hub was overrun by crowds the previous day, although the mishaps were minimized in the Western news. And the reports that you saw by the agency kind of understated it completely. WhatsApp Communications said that the aid organization, it's called the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, was tasked with distributing humanitarian assistance. Again, that's only been for a few days. That they announced these hubs, which only will feed about 600,000 people, which is about, the population of Gaza is 2.1 million. They announced these hubs would be open. They would not be open on Wednesday morning because they needed to rearrange things following Tuesday's crisis, in which the hub saw crowds of people overrunning the site in search of supplies. People are desperate for food. People are desperate, absolutely desperate. So this is not a crazy mob. It's a mob of hungry people. And this is the only food that they've had access to in 2 months? It was, the foundation stated it was working diligently to renew the distribution as soon as possible. Tuesday, according to the chairman of the party Israel Beitenu, that's Lieberman, humanitarian aid in Gaza is funded by Mossad. Mossad is the CIA, I think. It's one of the security agencies, Secret Service. So Lieberman said that this aid agency is funded by Mossad and the Israeli Defense Ministry. Now, there's tons of articles. I won't go into the details of why that's so problematic, but humanitarian aid being controlled by the defense industry, which is actually the defense industry is the one that's dropping the bombs. That's a major conflict of interest, for example. So Lieberman posted on Twitter that hundreds of millions of dollars are being spent at the expense of Israeli citizens. On Saturday, a Swiss-based NGO asked authorities to investigate the activities of this agency, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which is US-backed, planning to oversee a new model of aid distribution. So they're under investigation because of these dynamics. The United Nations totally opposes this mechanism of aid distribution, as do international NGOs, as does Churches for Middle East Peace. Now, another thing that was announced this week about Gaza, this was announced earlier this month, but I missed it. It's called the Gideon's Chariot Plan. So Israel is implementing it now. This plan was announced weeks ago. Prior to the visit with President Trump, the Israeli army announced they were going to siege complete control of the Gaza Strip. They were going to displace the entire population to a small area of land. I've heard reports it could be down to 25% of the entire Gaza Strip, and provide Palestinians with only enough food so they don't starve to death as part of an expanded military operation ominously called Gideon's Chariots. That's the biblical name that refers to a mighty warrior in the Hebrew scriptures or the Old Testament. Israel's security cabinet unanimously approved this plan on May 4th, hours after the country's military said that they were going to strengthen their capacity by mobilizing tens of thousands of reservists to serve related to Gaza. The plan aspects which are being implemented were set to fully start after Trump left the Middle East and if a ceasefire was not reached, which is why they're being implemented now. On Tuesday of this week, the Gaza Health Humanitarian Foundation, GHF, announced that it has opened the first distribution hubs. So that started Tuesday. So Tuesday was the day one. Wednesday was when this crisis happened. So 2 days, only 2 days before they had to Wednesday delay things. That's how limited the delivery of food has been by the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. The location of the hubs were not specified. It remained unclear who was funding the project. That's why it's such a big deal that Lieberman said that about Mossad. And Israeli agencies said that it was the first proposed by Israeli officials in the earliest weeks of the war. So this plan for GHF has been on the table for a long time. Now, it also was announced that the American personnel, who were the private personnel, failed to control the people who retreated from the positions. I already mentioned what we heard about helicopters being fired from the air and reports of gunfire. The other big news is that Jake Wood, who was the chief executive officer of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, he resigned. I think it was Wednesday. He said it's not possible, it might have been Tuesday, but it was this week, to implement the Israeli-backed plan while also strictly adhering to humanitarian principles of humanity, neutrality, impartiality, and independence. GHF named John Akri as the interim executive director following Wood's resignation. So some of the concerns that have been raised, it seems that Wood agreed. The executive director of the UN World Food Program currently is Cindy McCain. She said on Sunday that the food situation in Gaza is catastrophic. 500,000 people are extremely food insecure. The World Food Program last Friday said 15 of its trucks were looted in Gaza last week. So aid's been going in now, less than 2 weeks? Just a very limited amount of time that trucks have been looted. An incident, the agency said, underlined the insecurity connected to hunger, desperation, anxiety over whether or not food is coming. Now, what's so significant about that is the occupying power is obligated to keep security. So what the military establishment has done is they're defeating Hamas, or going to war against Hamas, but they also have killed all the police officers or arrested them. There's no security establishment. There's nothing left of, the government, et cetera. And so you don't have any agency that's local to control these things when people are so hungry. And so the idea that, there's no security is because of the effects of the bombing and, the indiscriminate actions of the Israeli military. Swiss authorities said on Sunday they're exploring whether or not to open a legal case against GHF. I think I mentioned that. An Israeli airstrike on a school on Monday and other targets in Gaza killed at least 25 people, and it was just horrific. There were numerous sites that day. It just was so awful. I saw a video. I think I mentioned it yesterday. Israeli strikes also killed 30 Palestinians on Sunday. The Israeli military is systematically using Palestinians as human shields in Gaza, despite the practice being prohibited by Israeli and international law. This is according to both Israeli soldiers and Palestinian former detainees. The Israeli military says it strictly prohibits the using of civilians as shields and otherwise coercing them to participate in operations. I mentioned this statistic already, but I just want to emphasize it. Israel aims to control 75% of Gaza within the next 2 months and to push Palestinian civilians into just a quarter of the territory. That is unfathomable. Gaza was one of the most densely populated places in the earth, 26 miles long, prior to October 7th, 2023. Take the same amount of people and try to put them into a quarter of that territory, and what will you have? Now, only 4.6% of Gaza's croppable land, so land that was used for farming previously that could be farmed, less than 5% of it can be cultivated due to the damage and access restrictions from bombing and war. A Palestinian official yesterday claimed that Hamas has agreed to the U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff's proposal for a ceasefire. Witkoff said the proposal that was being discussed was not the same as his, and it was completely unacceptable. But an Israeli official likewise denied that the proposal was Washington's and said no Israeli government would accept it. But just today, this morning, this was 8 o'clock, I think, in the morning when I was in Switzerland this morning. So who knows what time it was here. It was announced that there was a new deal on the table. Witkoff has a new proposal. It includes a minor withdrawal of the Israeli forces, new aid distribution. It would involve 10 living hostages and 18 hostages' bodies being returned. It would involve a 60-day, 2-month short-term ceasefire. It would also involve distribution changes of aid, but it would allow the potential for Israel to go back to war after the end of the ceasefire agreement. That was a part of the details of the plan. It's yet to be known if it's agreed upon. One of the updates I gave this week was about the statistics of the occupied West Bank. In April alone, there were 16 Palestinians killed, 351 Palestinian injuries in the West Bank, 122 settler attacks just in the month of April. Nearly 400 Palestinians, 378 to be precise, were displaced in the month of April. There were 0 Israeli fatalities in the West Bank and 4 injuries in April. Between January of 2024 and April 2025, so a year and 4 months, April 30th, so a year and 4 months between January 1st, 2024 and April 30th, 2025, 616 Palestinians have been killed, including 115 children. 4,512 Palestinians have been injured, including 904 children. There have been almost 2,000 settler attacks, resulting in casualties or property damage, and 41,272 Palestinians have been displaced in the last year and 4 months. Israeli fatalities in the West Bank is at 29 people. It includes 3 children and 17 members of the Israeli Defense Forces. So they say you shouldn't do math in public. Is that 12? So 12 civilians, 17 soldiers killed in the West Bank in April. 160 Israeli soldiers or Israeli injuries, including 4 children and 87 members of Israeli forces. Also in the West Bank, the Defense Ministry confirmed that the government has approved, this is also very significant news, the construction of 22 new settlement units. This was a huge announcement made today. This includes a series of new communities and the legalization of several outposts that have been illegal, according to Israeli law. The move was aimed at cementing Israel's hold over the area and thwarting the establishment of the Palestinian state. And it's increasingly being said that one of the things that's going to happen at the June summit at the United Nations is that France is going to declare Palestine, acknowledge Palestine as a state. So to combat that or counterbalance or who knows why, but the Israeli expansionism, 22 new settlement projects. That's projects, that's different locations. That's not how many settlers, it's just exponential. In Israel, midweek, the renewed ceasefire talks, Netanyahu said he's only going to end the war. Listen to this. Netanyahu said he's only going to end the war if Hamas releases all of the hostages, which, I mean, I want all the hostages to be released. But Hamas has to step down from power. I have no issue with that. And if President Donald Trump's plan to relocate the territory's population outside of Gaza is implemented. In other words, if the Palestinian people from Gaza are displaced completely, that's only when Netanyahu will end the war. Now, the reason for that is once Netanyahu's out of power, it's very likely he's going to jail. So he has every incentive to keep the war continuing. Crowds of far-right Israelis chanted insults and assaulted Palestinians during the Jerusalem Day parade, commemorating Israeli forces taking Palestinian-majority East Jerusalem. This was during the Six-Day 1967 war. So that commemoration happens on Flag Day or Jerusalem Day. And there were insults and assaults this week during Jerusalem Day. Also on that day, the National Security Minister Ben-Gvir said Gaza is ours, and he called against giving humanitarian aid to Gaza. He said we shouldn't give aid to terrorists, not fuel, not food. Hamas needs to receive a bullet to the head. He said that while a total victory is near, Netanyahu must allow for the Israeli defenses to finish the job. Jerusalem is ours, Israel is ours, Gaza is ours, and we must continue demanding without compromise. This was Ben-Gvir in a speech on the Western Wall. Israel's Knesset approved the first stage of proposing a bill to establish a special court to address suspects accused of genocidal acts. 39 MKs voted in favor of the bill. 1 MK was opposed. I can talk about the significance of that later. Widespread protests took place all over Israel during the 600-day, calling for the return of hostages, the end of the war, and an establishment of a state commission of inquiry. Thousands of people acting as Israeli activists held pictures of Palestinian children who have been killed in Gaza. They held pictures of Palestinian children who've been killed, calling for an end to the war, calling for a ceasefire. This was during a protest in Tel Aviv on Saturday. Thousands joined this protest, calling for the end of the killing of Palestinian children and the end of the bombing of Gaza. Praise be to God. That's something that Israelis are rising up, at least some of them. So we just need to pray that that movement increases and support the people who are courageously doing that. Lebanon also said they're going to disarm the armed Palestinian factions in refugee camps in June. We've talked about that previously. This is an attempt to practice that before trying to disarm Hezbollah. In Syria, the IDF said they established a medical clinic in Hajar, a town in South Syria, meant to treat Druze population that's located there. 500 Druze Syrians have already been treated at that particular clinic. The Trump administration on Friday did lift major sanctions from Syria, according to Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State. The first step aimed at fulfilling Trump's promise to help stabilize Damascus's new government. Separately, U.S. Ambassador to Turkey Tom Barak on Friday said he'd assumed the role of special envoy to Syria. There were also escalations or hostilities between the Houthis and the IDF. The IDF hit Houthi targets at the airport in Yemen, Sa'ana, saying it has destroyed the last remaining plane used by the Houthis. In Iran is open to compromises in nuclear talks with Washington, but uranium enrichment remains non-negotiable. The foreign minister of Tehran spokesperson said this week. Trump on Sunday hinted an announcement regarding the talks could be coming in the next couple of days. Now, we've heard that numerous times before. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem met with officials in Israel on Sunday and Monday. According to Netanyahu's office, Noem spoke in a meeting on Sunday of her unwavering support for the prime minister and the state of Israel and her great appreciation for Netanyahu's conduct in war. Eric Traeger, I just won't make any comments about that. Eric Traeger of the National Security Council, who was responsible and engaged in the Middle East portfolio, was put on administrative leave this past week. There were several White House staff members and NSA advisors who were let go or put on leave. Secretary of State Marco Rubio is the one that made those announcements. Some good news this week, USIP, the U.S. Institute of Peace, reclaimed its headquarters after winning in court against Musk's cost cutting. So USIP retook control of its headquarters on Wednesday, just 2 days after a federal judge said the firing of its board and employees by Musk's department, DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, was illegal. In Madrid on Monday, Spain hosted 20 countries in international conversations as a precursor to the June summit I was talking about. The goal, stopping the war. Actually, the foreign minister of Spain said stopping this war, which no longer has any goal. That in this terrible moment, in this humanitarian catastrophe, we must stop this war to break the blockade of humanitarian assistance that must go unimpeded. The Madrid meeting, as I mentioned, is a precursor to the meeting that's being hosted by France and Saudi Arabia in New York in mid-June. There was a previous gathering in Madrid last year that brought together countries including Egypt, Jordan, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey, as well as European nations such as Norway and the Republic of Ireland that have recognized a Palestinian state. Sunday's meeting did include members of the Arab League and the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. The goal of the June summit is to promote a two-state solution. After the EU decided this week to review its cooperation deal with Israel, Alvarez said we must consider sanctions. We must consider everything to stop this war, meaning sanctions against Israel. Sunday was my half Ironman to Victoria, British Columbia, and when I wrote this, I just said I was so tired. I just went for a run today. I'm feeling great. I'm so grateful. We've started that fundraising campaign. We're 1% of the way to our $140,000 goal. The goal is $1,000 for each mile of the Ironman. The Ironman will be September 20th. I did the half this last weekend. So thank you to those who've supported. If you would share it with your friends, ask family members to give $25, right? Or send us names and we'll call your family. Tell us who we should reach out to. Help us with this. We could really use your help. So September 20th is the goal, $140,000, 2.4 mile swim. It'll be a 112-mile bike ride and a marathon, 26.2. So this weekend was half of that. Now the swim was canceled because there was algae in the water producing toxins. So I'm glad we didn't swim. But I finished in 6 hours and 20 minutes, and it included 56 miles on a bike and a half marathon. And the bike had 3,000 feet of elevation. So it was like climbing. But I did at the time, even if you add in what I would have done in the swim, I still was an hour faster than I did this event 10 years ago. So praise be to God. There was a blog I published about this, talking about my dad and some of the reasons I run and how I was running for Gaza. And so I'd encourage you to read that. It's on the Do Justice blog from the Christian Reform Church called Running for Peace. And I just want to close by just reading a bit of that as a prayer. Hebrews 1:1-2 says, therefore, we are surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses. Let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles. Let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. This led me back to the Mother Teresa quote that I first learned from Lynn Hybels. She and I were together at Willow Creek Community Church way back in the day. I learned this quote from her in 2010 at the very first Christ at the Checkpoint conference in Bethlehem. And Lynn quoted Mother Teresa saying, the reason we do not have peace is that we've forgotten that we belong to one another. And I write about those connections in this blog. But I said about the quote, I fundamentally believe that to be true. We're all made in the image of God. Might we mourn with those who mourn, whomever they may be. Might we advocate for human rights, equality, and an end to all violence, that by the military prowess of Israel, that which is blockading even still the vast majority of the population in the Gaza Strip, working towards a new reality and a better future, might we do so in the name of love, in the name of justice. May it be so in the name of Christ. Amen.